Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Welcome back to Spanish Lessons with Professor Jason. Before I get into today's lesson, I want to send out a very special shout out to my #1 fans, Tyler Ann Grubbs and Caroline Bailey from Seacoast Collegiate High School in Florida. Tyler Ann and Caroline reached out to me on Twitter to let me know that they are, in fact, my #1 fans on the internet, and in appreciation, I agreed to dedicate my next Spanish video lesson to them. I also want to send out a really special hello to their lovely teacher, Elga Acosta. Thank you so much for using my video lessons in your class. Muchas gracias. So, Tyler Ann and Caroline, as promised, this video lesson goes out especially to you guys, and thanks again for being my biggest fans. The topic we're going to cover today is the present perfect subjunctive in Spanish, which apparently the students in the Seacoast Collegiate Spanish program have been working on lately. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's go ahead and get started. Empecemos. Alright, so here is the overview for this lesson, my presentation on the present perfect subjunctive. First thing we're going to do is look at the present perfect indicative, or regular present perfect if you will, draw some contrast between that and the present perfect subjunctive. We'll look at the names of the tenses, but we'll also look at the time frames, some differences and similarities there, and sentence structure. Then we're going to get into quickly, when is the subjunctive needed? In what situations do you have to use the subjunctive? And that analysis applies to the present perfect subjunctive. Finally, we'll get around to looking at the forms. How do you conjugate for this verb tense? What do you do with the verb haber, the auxiliary verb, and the past participles? Then we're going to go through some examples, and I'll comment on usage. And finally, we'll end up with some guided practice exercises. Alright, just a momentary pause to talk about names or terminology. I've already referred to the present perfect indicative, or the regular present perfect, if you will. The present perfect subjunctive, which is the focus of this lesson. In Spanish, these would be called el pretérito perfecto de indicativo or el pretérito perfecto de subjuntivo. So I think it's important to know what these tenses are called. So if you wanted to Google it in Spanish, for example, you'd want to look for pretérito perfecto de subjuntivo. But we're focusing today on the present perfect subjunctive. Now, to sort of set the stage for the present perfect subjunctive, I want to talk a little bit about the present perfect indicative, o pretérito perfecto de indicativo, right, in terms of the time frame it refers to. The present perfect is used to talk about what someone has done or hasn't done in a past period that leads up to and includes the moment we might call as of now. So the idea of something that has already taken place is the present perfect. Examples. We have won 6 games. Nosotros hemos ganado 6 partidos. This is the present perfect indicative. They have seen that movie already. Ellos ya han visto esa película. You can, of course, also use the present perfect indicative to refer to things that haven't taken place yet, right? So that idea of already or not yet, they're both the present perfect. Here are some examples of the not yet idea. We haven't played well this season. So far, right? So far, not yet, we haven't played well this season so far. Nosotros no hemos jugado bien esta temporada. He hasn't given me the check yet. Él todavía no me ha dado el cheque. Él todavía no me ha dado el cheque. Now, before talking about the time frame or time frames that we refer to when using the present perfect subjunctive, I want to take a quick look at some differences in their sentence structure. One thing to point out, you can see on this slide, is the present perfect subjunctive sentences have a slightly more complicated construction. So, present perfect would be something like, they've studied a lot, right? As of now. They've studied a lot. Present perfect subjunctive, I hope that they have studied a lot. Or present perfect again. They haven't waited a long time. Present perfect subjunctive. I hope that they haven't waited a long time. Espero que ellos no hayan esperado mucho tiempo. So, in a present perfect subjunctive construction, we have 2 clauses, right? That's why they're longer, which reference 2 different time frames. The first clause verb time frame is present. I hope, right? I hope that. And the second clause verb time frame is past. Haven't waited, that they haven't waited or didn't wait a long time. Another really important thing to point out about the time frames of the present perfect subjunctive is that the past tense verb, right, the verb in the second clause, the dependent clause, can be a compound, right, where you hear have or has, haven't, or a simple past construction. But either way, you're using the present perfect subjunctive in Spanish. So for example, I hope they have studied a lot, or I hope they studied a lot. You can see the contrast between the compound past and the simple past. Either way, it's the same in Spanish. Espero que hayan estudiado mucho. Or I hope they haven't waited a long time, or I hope they didn't wait. Simple past, long. Same exact equivalent in Spanish. Espero que ellos no hayan esperado mucho tiempo. So on this slide, you should be able to spot the differences between the simple present perfect, right? In this case, on the left-hand side, examples of the present perfect indicative. And on the right-hand side, right, examples of sentences that are a little bit more complex because they have those two different clauses and, right, they're in the present perfect subjunctive. So, nosotros hemos comprado las entradas, or Tyler ya ha visto esa película. Those are simple, straightforward, present indicative, present perfect indicative. But on the right-hand side, espero que or dudo que, you're introducing a main clause, right, that requires a subjunctive. You're complicating a little bit, and we have the present perfect subjunctive. So let's take a closer look at one of those examples, the one that features the regular present perfect or the present perfect indicative. And what you'll be able to see is that it has a very simple, straightforward subject, verb, object, right, syntax. Tyler's the subject, ha visto's the verb, esa película is the object. So there's just one clause. However, looking at the example on the right-hand side of the slide, right, present perfect subjunctive, we can point out that it's a little bit more complicated. There are two clauses, the main clause, dudo que, I doubt that, followed by a subordinate clause. Tyler has already seen that movie. Dudo que Tyler ya haya visto esa película. So the structure is a little bit more complicated with a main clause and a subordinate clause. Now, you know me, I hate to brag, but we're going to talk about when is the subjunctive required, and I really feel like this particular slide is worth its weight in gold if you get it, if it clicks for you, okay? So, we need to use the subjunctive in general, right, under these conditions. When the sentence has two clauses, a main clause and a subordinate clause, right? And you can have two configurations. You can have a main clause with a verb, in which case, remember the formula, subject 1 plus verb plus the conjunction que plus a different subject. That's important. The subject of the second clause has to be a different subject plus the verb. So, yo espero que tú hayas entendido. I hope that you understood, or I hope that you have understood. That similarly, you can have an impersonal expression instead of a subject and verb, like you see in yellow here. So you might have something like es, then an adjective, and then the rest of the formula is the same. An example might be an impersonal expression like es triste que. Es triste que ellos hayan perdido su vuelo. It's sad that they missed their flight. So that's one condition to use a subjunctive, is you have to have that particular sentence structure, main clause and subordinate clause. However, the second condition has to be met too, and that is that the sentence conveys a certain kind of meaning. So you have structure and meaning. What kinds of meaning trigger the subjunctive in the subordinate clause? Well, its main verb conveys hope, persuasion, will, or influence. In other words, subject of clause 1 is trying to, hopes that, wants, needs that. Subject of clause 2 does something. Or its main verb conveys doubt, uncertainty, denial. Its main verb conveys an emotional or subjective judgment. Or it has an adjective clause that describes persons or things as indefinite, unknown, non-existent, or negated. We're going to see examples of all of these. And then finally, right, if the sentence has an adverbial clause that frames an action as hypothetical, future, or as yet unrealized. So just a little quick exercise to see if that registered with you, right? Would these sentences, right, are they indicative or subjunctive? And perhaps you can cheat by noticing the forms, but have you done your homework? Has hecho la tarea? You've done the homework. I hope that you have done the homework. Espero que ya hayas hecho la tarea already. Ella sabe que hemos vuelto. Ella duda que hayamos vuelto. El detective cree que el sospechoso ha mentido. The detective believes the suspect lied or has lied. El abogado no cree que su cliente haya mentido. The attorney doesn't believe that his client has lied. So, are they indicative or are they subjunctive? All right, let's see how you did. I've highlighted some cues that might indicate when something requires the subjunctive. First one's indicative. Second one is subjunctive because it's somebody hoping that someone else does something else. They're trying to influence their behavior. It's a manifestation of will. Third one is indicative. She knows that. She's not asserting, she's asserting fact. She's not saying that she doubts or that she doesn't believe. Fourth one, subjunctive, because it is doubt. Ella duda que, right? Fifth one, the detective believes that. In other words, the detective is asserting that the suspect has lied. He believes it. For him, it's true. It's objective reality. And then finally, if we use a phrase like no cree que, that suggests doubt, uncertainty, or denial. All right, so let's shift gears and finally talk about the forms for the present perfect subjunctive. By now, you've seen 10 or 20 examples of the present perfect subjunctive, and you know that it consists of two parts, really, the verb conjugation. You have the auxiliary verb haber, which is the equivalent of the English to have, and the conjugations you can see here, right? Haya, hayas, haya, hayamos, hayáis, hayan. And then that's followed by what's called the past participle form of the main verb, right? So if it's I have spoken, yo haya hablado, right? You have eaten, tú hayas comido, right? And so forth. So hablado, comido, bebido are examples of regular past participles in Spanish. So you take the auxiliary verb haber, you conjugate that verb in the subjunctive, which is one of the few irregular verbs in the subjunctive, haya, hayas, hayas, hayamos, hayáis, hayan, and then it's followed by a past participle. I put a note on the side so that you can see sort of the placement if you do have a reciprocal or reflexive construction, right? Something like, I hope that you guys went to bed early. That verb acostarse is usually used reflexively, right? Espero que ustedes se hayan acostado temprano. In other words, the reflexive pronoun comes out in front of the verb haber. She doubts, right, that she has met me before. Ella duda que me haya conocido antes. That one's a little bit different. There you have a direct object pronoun. But the point is, pronouns come before the conjugated form of haber. Now, as far as coming up with the past participle form of regular verbs, of your main verb, right, in that dependent clause, it's pretty straightforward. I'm guessing you've come across this before and you're familiar with it, right? AR verbs, ado, right? ER verbs and IR verbs end in ido. So, comprar, comprado, ganar, ganado, llegar, llegado, right? ER verbs like entender, comer, perder, entendido, comido, perdido. IR verbs like dormir, recibir, vivir. You can see dormido, recibido, vivido. However, and this can be a little bit frustrating when you're learning a language, many of the most commonly used verbs, main verbs, right, their past participles are irregular, and this is just a partial list, right? But these are some of the most commonly used verbs. So remember, hacer is hecho, haya hecho, hayamos hecho, right? Poner es puesto, right? Haya puesto, hayáis puesto. Romper, roto. Ver y volver, very common verbs, right? Que ella haya visto, que nosotros hayamos vuelto. So, be aware that many past participles are irregular. Another thing to remember about the past participle forms in the present perfect subjunctive or indicative is that they're invariable. So, you don't add an s to comprado. You don't make dicho feminine and plural. It's always masculine and singular, if you will. They're invariable forms in the verb tense. Okay, so during the next part of the presentation, I'm going to walk you through a bunch of examples of the uses of the present perfect subjunctive, right? Forget about the present perfect indicative. The rest of the entire presentation will focus on the present perfect subjunctive. So, as a reminder, what to look for, because it's important that you notice these things, right? So, notice the present perfect subjunctive in the examples after main clause verbs that convey will, persuasion, right? Hope and influence. After main clause verbs that convey doubt, uncertainty, denial, emotional or subjective judgments, in adjective clauses that describe persons or things as indefinite, unknown, non-existent, or negated, and then finally in adverbial clauses, right, which frame actions as hypothetical, future, as yet unrealized. This may be all just mumbo jumbo, so I'll come back to these things when we actually see the examples. There's a few other things that I want you to keep an eye out for as we go through the examples, right? For example, impersonal expressions that introduce subordinate clauses. So expressions like es posible que, es bueno que, es probable que, es imposible que, or que bueno que, right? Or ojalá que, which basically means I hope that. Also look for main clause verbs indicating future and command. So it's important to point out that generally the present perfect subjunctive comes after a main clause verb that's conjugated in the present, like espero que. But you could also have a main clause verb indicated or conjugated in the future, vamos a, podrás, or a command like be grateful that, all right, or be glad that, agradece que, agradezcan que. You'll see some examples. Look for the present perfect subjunctive used for the English simple past and compound past constructions. So did or has done, right? Ate, has eaten. Also, I'll throw in some reflexive constructions. You'll see the pronouns mete, se nos, and some of those irregular past participles will be sprinkled in. I really think that when you're dealing with a grammar construction that you want to learn or acquire, the best way is just to see a bunch of examples, a bunch of its grammatical use, until finally certain things about it just click for you. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through some examples. Some examples of the present perfect subjunctive, right, in terms of hope, will, persuasion. Espero que ya hayas comprado las entradas. I hope that you have bought the tickets already. Or Julio espera que ellos hayan llegado sin incidente. Julio hopes that they have arrived without incident. Again, you could just say that they arrived without incident. Simple past. We hope that. Esperamos que te hayas mejorado de la gripe. That you've gotten over the flu. Now, the examples on this slide also have to do with the idea of hoping that or trying to influence a person's behavior, persuasion. So, but different main clause situations. Ojalá que vosotros ya hayáis hecho las reservaciones. I hope you guys have already made the reservations. Alégrate de que, right? Be glad that. Alégrate de que Bo se haya acordado de tu cumpleaños. Be glad that Bo remembered or has remembered your birthday. Be grateful that. Agradezcan que. So these second and third examples are commands. Agradezcan que sus padres no se hayan enterado. Be grateful that your parents haven't found out or didn't find out. Turning our attention now to some examples of doubt, uncertainty, and denial in the subordinate clause, or main clause verbs that suggest doubt, uncertainty, and denial. No creo que, again, conjugated in the present tense. No creo que mis primos hayan leído esa novela. I don't believe my cousins have read that novel or read that novel. ¿Dudas que los niños se hayan acostado ya? Reflexive verb. Do you doubt that the kids have gone to bed already or went to bed already? Es posible que me hayas visto en el centro. It's possible that. That's one of those impersonal expressions, but it suggests uncertainty. Es posible que me hayas visto en el centro. Irregular past participle, visto. So it's possible you may have seen me downtown, or it's possible that you saw me downtown. Es posible que me hayas visto en el centro. Es improbable que, another impersonal expression. Es improbable que Caroline haya abierto el paquete. It's not likely that Caroline opened the package or has opened the package. Now we're looking at some examples where the main clause suggests an emotional or a subjective judgment. Something like, I'm sorry that, or they don't like it, it's good that, it's strange that, okay? Siento mucho que hayas tenido que comer solo. Hayas tenido should be underlined just to emphasize the form. I'm sorry that you had to dine alone. Siento mucho que hayas tenido que comer solo. A ellos no les gusta que el banco haya cerrado temprano. They don't like the fact that the bank closed early. Qué bueno que, that's an emotional or subjective judgment. Qué bueno que no hayas visto esa película todavía. Or it's good that, or in other words, it's good that you haven't seen that movie yet. It's strange that, it's odd that. Es extraño que no nos hayan llamado esta tarde. Es extraño que no nos hayan llamado esta tarde. It's odd that they haven't called us yet this afternoon. A couple more examples like those on this slide. A mis padres les sorprende que ya hayamos vuelto de la playa. My parents are surprised, or it surprises my parents that we've already come back from the beach. Al profesor le molesta. So again, this suggests an emotional reaction. Al profesor le molesta que los estudiantes no hayan hecho la tarea. So the fact that the students haven't done the homework bothers the professor. Now these examples in general, when we're talking about the subjunctive, these examples with adjective clauses are a little bit harder to wrap our brains around. But the adjective clauses refer or describe antecedents, persons or things or places, as being indefinite or non-existent. So, necesitamos contratar, we want to hire, a personas que hayan viajado mucho. We need to hire, I should have said, people who have traveled a lot. We haven't identified the definite persons, but we know we're looking for persons who have traveled a lot, que hayan viajado mucho. No conozco a nadie, this is a non-existent situation, no conozco a nadie que haya estudiado en Harvard. I don't know anyone who studied at Harvard or who has studied at Harvard. Just as tricky for the beginning learner of the subjunctive, I think, are the adverbial clauses of time that refer to actions that haven't happened yet because they're hypothetical or they're situated in the future. They haven't been realized yet. So, look at the main clause verbs here are in the future, right? You can visit me when I've left the clinic. Podrás visitarme cuando haya salido de la clínica. Or, we're going to travel even if. That's something that hasn't happened yet, even if. Vamos a viajar aunque no hayas llegado, even if you haven't arrived. We'll stay in Miami until, in this example, until we're referring to something that hasn't happened yet, may not happen yet. This is kind of the asteroid scenario, I say, right? This is something that hasn't happened and may never happen, right? Nos quedaremos en Miami hasta que hayan acabado las vacaciones. So our vacation isn't over yet, right? And it's completely possible that an asteroid could strike the Earth and end all creation before it ends, okay? So these are uses of the subjunctive, present perfect subjunctive, for adverbial clauses that deal with events that are hypothetical or haven't happened yet. So just to make sure that this is clear in our mind after seeing all those rules and descriptions and examples and commentary, we're going to do a couple different types of guided practice, and I want you to pull out your pencil or your pen or your phone and go through these with me. The first thing we're going to do is some guided practice in the form of translations, direct translations. So I simply want you to look at these 5 sentences on the slide, right? All of them use the present perfect subjunctive in the subordinate clause and translate them into good Spanish. What I'm going to do, right, you can pause it and do your work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to the whiteboard and I'm going to work through these translations. But don't look at that segment of the video, hit pause until you're ready. Okay, so let's go through these one by one, these translation examples. The first one we have is the professor hopes that her students have studied. So that's going to be something like, since it's her students, la profesora espera que, so that's our present tense part, espera que, right, that's our main clause, sus estudiantes, the subject of the dependent clause, sus estudiantes or sus alumnos, and then we take our auxiliary verb, hayan
since it's plural, estudiantes, hayan estudiado. Okay? La profesora espera que sus estudiantes hayan estudiado. All right? There's example number 1, translation number 1. Let's look at the next one. I hope that you have received my message. I hope that you have received my message. Okay? So, yo espero que, that's our dependent clause right there, right? Yo espero que, and I apologize for the autofocus craziness, que tú, that'd be optional pronoun to include there, hayas, or que usted haya, depending on our degree of formality, right? There's our auxiliary verb. Recibido mi mensaje or mi recado. Okay? Espero que tú hayas recibido mi mensaje. Let's look at the third one here. All right, third example. Back to our shout out to Tyler. Well, Tyler doesn't believe that we have won the game or that we won the game. Remember, this could be we won, simple past, and in Spanish we're going to see the same form even if it was we have won. Okay, just a reminder. So, this is one of the situations where we have uncertainty, doubt, uncertainty, or denial, right? Tyler no cree que, there's our dependent clause that's going to trigger the subjunctive. Tyler no cree que nosotros, I always misspell that for some reason. Nosotros, okay, hayamos ganado el partido. Okay? Tyler no cree que nosotros hayamos ganado el partido. All right. I think we're on number 4 now. Here we have another case of doubt, uncertainty, or denial. Doubt, in this case. We doubt that they have already, remember already, ya, it's that idea. We doubt that they have already arrived. So, nosotros dudamos, the verb is dudar, right? Nosotros dudamos que, right? That's our dependent clause. Nosotros dudamos que ellos ya, I'm going to just plug that in right here already, ya hayan, that's the form that goes with ellos, and then llegado. Nosotros dudamos que ellos ya hayan llegado. And our final example here is another disbelief or not believing, right? You don't believe that I've heard that song before, right? Before might show up as antes, or that I've already heard that song, ya. Okay, so look for that in a second. Okay, question. ¿Tú no crees que yo, again, that's our, this part right here is our main clause, right? ¿Tú no crees que yo ya haya, that's the form that goes with yo, right? In our dependent clause here, haya escuchado esa canción. Okay. ¿Tú no crees que yo ya haya escuchado esa canción? Or you could say, ¿tú no crees que yo haya escuchado esa canción antes? Before? Okay. Again, another case of disbelief, right? Doubt, uncertainty, or denial. ¿Tú no crees que yo haya escuchado esa canción antes?
Alright, I hope you liked the whiteboard technique, and just to sort of reinforce or reiterate those answers you just saw me kind of work through. here's how you might have translated those direct translation exercises. Now, just to get us a little bit away from directly translating English to Spanish, I want you to think about a scenario, a situation that would require someone to use the present perfect subjunctive. So it would be something like this. You just had a friend, your friend from Puerto Rico, Vanessa. She spent a week with your family. Now you guys are in the car, you're driving her back to the airport, and on the way to the airport, just as you're getting ready to leave or getting ready to check in or whatever, you're going to do a couple things. You're going to mention that you hope that she, right? Entonces, espero que tú, you hope that she has had a good time. You hope that she liked your guest room. You hope that she learned a little bit about your city. But since not everything went perfectly, you're going to express an emotional or subjective, right, judgment, telling her, but I'm very sorry that, right? Siento mucho que your brother was rude to her. Right? So I'm very sorry my brother was rude to you, that you guys didn't do anything too interesting, and that she didn't like the food. So again, I'm going to go to the whiteboard, pause the video. I want you to think through these examples, work through them, then you can watch me on the whiteboard.
All right, so again, the situation here is that you're dropping your friend Vanessa off at the airport, who's been visiting your family from Puerto Rico. And as you're dropping her off or taking her to the airport, you want to mention a couple things. So for example, you're going to mention that you hope she had a good time or had fun. For have a good time, you can use the expression pasarlo bien, right? Or you could use the verb to have fun, the verb divertirse. And we'll give a couple of examples with both. So you want to say, I hope you had a good time with us, right? Yo espero que, you're talking to Vanessa, tú lo hayas pasado bien con nosotros. Vanessa, espero que tú lo hayas pasado bien con nosotros, o muy bien con nosotros, right? Muy bien. Espero que lo hayas pasado muy bien con nosotros. Or if I want to use this verb here, espero que te hayas, so here we have a reflexive verb, right? Divertirse, que te hayas divertido mucho, pardon my handwriting, con nosotros. So both of these would work to express this idea. I hope you had a good time with us, or I hope you had fun with us, right? Espero que lo hayas pasado muy bien con nosotros. Espero que te hayas divertido mucho con nosotros. Okay? To express the idea, again, present perfect subjunctive ideas here, right? I hope you liked the guest room, right? This one's going to involve the use of the verb gustar, right? So, espero que te haya gustado, el cuarto, here's a vocabulary item, right? El cuarto de visitas o el cuarto de huéspedes, a little bit more formal, de visitas in some dialects, okay? So again, when you're using gustar, right, this is the actual subject of the sentence, okay? So that's what's determining that that verb's conjugated in the third person singular. Espero que te haya gustado el cuarto de huéspedes. In other words, I hope the guest room has been or was pleasing to you. Espero que te haya gustado el cuarto de huéspedes. And then finally, I hope you learned a little bit about our city. Espero que, and again, espero que, probably the number one reason that the present perfect subjunctive gets used is to express that you hope that someone has done or did something. Espero que tú, remember this is optional, hayas learned, hayas aprender, right? Entonces, aprendido un poco sobre mi or nuestra, our, nuestra ciudad. Okay? Vanessa, espero que hayas aprendido un poco sobre nuestra ciudad. It's feminine. Nuestra ciudad. Okay? So those are some positive or neutral things you can say, right? But of course, not everything went so well, right? Not everything was perfect. So here we're going to use something like siento mucho que, right? I'm sorry that. Vanessa, siento mucho que, that's our main clause. Siento mucho que, I'm very sorry that, right? Siento mucho que, your brother was rude to her. Siento mucho que mi hermano haya sido. A good word for rude in Spanish is grosero. It's pretty strong though. Siento mucho que mi hermano haya sido, okay, our verb here is ser, que haya sido grosero contigo. Siento mucho que mi hermano haya sido grosero contigo. O siento mucho que mi hermano te haya tratado mal, right? That he treated you poorly. Or siento mucho que we didn't do anything interesting, right? Que no, siento mucho que no hayamos hecho, here our verb is hacer, remember that has an irregular past participle, hecho nada interesante. Pucha, Vanessa, siento mucho que no hayamos hecho nada interesante. Siento mucho que no hayamos hecho nada interesante. And then finally, I'm really sorry you weren't crazy about the food, right? You didn't like the food. So again, these last two, in English, you see the simple past, right? And really, in all three of them, you see the simple past in English, but because we're using the subjunctive, right, it has to use the present in the past. And our main clause verb is in the present. We're using the present perfect subjunctive in Spanish. So, siento mucho que, I'm very sorry that, no te haya, because we're going to be talking about comida, so it's singular, que no te haya gustado la comida. Siento mucho que no te haya gustado la comida.
So I hope using the whiteboard and seeing me kind of work through it in slow motion, as it were, helps to make things clear, right? How I go from thinking in English to producing the expressions in Spanish. So, how did you do on our practice exercises? I'm guessing really well, right? Congratulations on surviving my presentation on the forms and uses of the present perfect subjunctive in Spanish. I hope you found it to be informative and useful. If so, please share it with others and let me know if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, okay? I've recorded lots of other videos on Spanish and Portuguese related topics, so I hope you'll keep watching and recommend me to your friends. And don't forget to look for me on your favorite social media platforms. I'm just about everywhere. Thanks again for watching, and be sure to visit the Professor Jason channel again soon. Hasta pronto. Ciao.